Delamore Schwartz said, "Time is the fire in which we burn." And with this album, there's a real sense of urgency as that clock edges ever closer to midnight. But is it any good? Let's find out, shall we? Welcome, classic rock fans, to an episode of New Album Review. If you're new to this channel, please be sure to click like and do all that stuff. And whilst you're down there, check out some of the links below this video for ways you can support the sterling work done here at Classic Album Review. So Marillion have released a new album, an album that's built around that central motif of time running out, the doomsday clock, in many respects, edging ever closer to midnight. And this is the central and troubling image around which the album is built, very much like the storm analogy that was made on Fear. Nevertheless, this album is punchier. We don't wallow in those ambient soundscapes that very much in part defined the previous record. Whereas Fear was a meditation on Britain and Britishness and takes a swipe at this isolationist mindset, this album, on the other hand, very much focuses on compassion and hope in times of national crisis, where there is light at the end of the tunnel for those who have weathered the storm. This clock ticking along, of course, can be viewed from numerous different angles, whether it's our time, the planet's time, or even humanity's time. That clock is ticking no matter how you cut it. Interestingly, Brian Wilson said in his autobiography that time flashes by so quickly you can't even grab hold of it. A sentiment, of course, he went on to explore in the wonderful song Till I Die from the Surf's Up album. I think the lyric from that is, "I'm a cork on the ocean floating over the raging sea." And certainly on the last Marillion album we were drowning in fear. This one gives us something to cling to, hopefully each other. This is one of those lockdown albums. There's a whole subgenre of those at the moment. But it's best summed up, I think, by Prog magazine that said that if Fear was a State of the Nation address, An Hour Before It's Dark is a State of Humanity address. This could be seen very much as an album to attempt to raise the spirits and appeal to our shared humanity. It certainly wouldn't be the first album of this kind. I mean, let's not forget Springsteen's Rising album emerges from the ashes of 9/11, as well as in 1964, Sinatra and Bing Crosby recorded America, I Hear You Singing, as a passionate response to the Kennedy assassination. Nevertheless, it seems to me that Marillion have created something very, very special with this record. In fact, they have done with the last 3 albums. It's a remarkable trilogy, sounds that can't be made. Fear and this one, a trilogy that will be spoken of and listened to long after the band's own clocks have stopped ticking. Even sooner in Mark Kelly's case, if he insists on playing chicken with large vehicles. This album, if not the finest album they've done, it's certainly one of them during that post-Marbles renaissance. But whether this is referencing the climate crisis or the beating of a heart as life ebbs away, Marillion have certainly put their finger on the pulse with this one. And rather than sitting around on their over-sanitised hands, they've seized the zeitgeist like they did with Fear. Maybe there has to be some kind of national or existential crisis for Marillion to make an album these days. Death is undeniably a theme on this record. It looms large over the proceedings like a pall, an appropriate simile, I think. We get actual death explored, I think, in Care, the death of a way of life or even a way of thinking. But with the album Fear, you felt the whole thing was closing in on you. It had a very claustrophobic feel amid that accusatory pulse of sound. This album, sonically at least, feels like an exhalation for humanity, albeit behind our flimsy face masks and visors. As I've said, its tone is crisper and brighter overall. In fact, Hogarth has gone on to say, despite the seemingly bleak contemplations across this album, the virus, our mortality, medical science, the overall feeling of the music is surprisingly upbeat, and the addition of choir noir have added another new soul and colour to things. And he's quite right in terms of the way choir noir affect the atmosphere of this record, as well as in praise of Folly. Not the Erasmus text, of course, but that wonderful string quartet that the Marillion worked with our friends from the orchestra, I think it was called. Nevertheless, all these strings have been plucked out and pulled together to help Marillion paint their masterpiece, and what a masterpiece it is. So if you'll indulge me and allow me to refer to my notes, which is a bit of a catchphrase for this channel, let us go through this album track by track. Of course, we already know Hard on Yourself, which was pre-released. So this track starts with that atmospheric swell of keyboards. Mark Kelly has seems to have moved away from those soloing twiddly bits to concerning himself with more atmospheric pulse of sound. And he provides the perfect platform for which our Rothers leaps with a dynamic, soaring guitar solo. I love the Handel-esque voices and the piano that introduces Hogarth's voice. Of course, it goes straight into the chorus. It's an interesting contrast between the chorus and the quite hushed mumblings of Hogarth's voice. It was once said of whispering Bob Harris that his voice was unassuming as a vibrator under 6 feet of sand. And Hogarth beautifully frames the dynamic range of this music with the use of his voice, which fluctuates from this almost hushed mewing to really belting them out when he needs to. I love the chorus, really, which is a warning to us for future generations. Be hard on yourself, you'll be glad you did. Lovely guitar texture from Rothery, of course, which at one point has something of a siren quality to it, all adding to the urgency of the number. And this song demands that our pursuit of luxury and comfort just simply cannot go on. Instead, the lyric suggests, paint a picture, sing a song, plant flowers in the park, get out and make it better. You've got an hour before it's dark. Reprogramming of the Gene is also a fascinating number. It starts with the chiming of children's voices before it explodes in a series of affirmations. It has almost a finality to it, I think. I love the line, I've seen the future and it ain't much. Or it ain't us, I'm not sure what he's singing there. Certainly we all need to change, reprogram that gene. Is there a cure for us? Suggesting that humanity is a virus, how apt, which infects the planet. I'm not the first person to make this analogy, of course. I think David Attenborough said human beings are a plague on Earth. But this number also does contain the deliciously quirky lyric, I want to be Dr. Frankenstein, put my brain in a box full of LED light. You can have it for Christmas. Next year it'll be cheaper. And 14 times as bright. Only a Kiss is a beautiful little musical interlude that segues straight into Murder Machines. This is one of the album's shortest and punchiest tracks, there's no doubt about that, set against the backdrop of pulsing guitar and keyboard swells. It's an incredibly catchy number. How appropriate for a number informed by a virus that it should be so infectious. If you'll forgive me for quoting at length, Steve Hogarth has said, I tried not to write about the virus, but it's been so much a part of our life for the past 2 years that it kept creeping in. The terrifying reality that to wrap arms around my father and mother could ultimately kill them gave birth to this song. The lyric was then developed to hint at jealousy and heartbreak, the pain of watching the woman you love embrace another man, or the emotional murder of a serial adulterer, and of course the arms of the superpowers. And the psychopaths who sometimes have their fingers on the triggers. Beware the murder machines. Certainly a song that's informed by the challenging times we've all faced. But it's one that also deals with the precious as well as the darker sides of human relationships. The Crow and the Nightingale. A tribute to Leonard Cohen, lovely choral voices that almost sounds as if they're singing out Hallelujah. How appropriate would that be? And you get this somber piano and atmospheric guitar trills. The song celebrates the sheer poeticism of Cohen's lyrics, which Hogarth at one point confesses, thank you for your words of longing, it doesn't really matter whether or not I understood them, he sings. I'm not 100% sure where the title actually comes from, whether it's something to do with Leonard Cohen's back catalogue, or whether it's a reference to the Aesop's fable, The Crow and the Nightingale, where the crow is declared the king of song. Perhaps, I don't know, I'm perhaps reaching here. Sierra Leone takes us straight into the narrative where a diamond is found amongst a rubbish heap where children scratch amongst broken glass. It's about dignity and respect, a tale of a poverty-stricken man who not only finds something that could transform his life in monetary terms, but nevertheless is struck by the beauty of it and refuses to sell it. And this realization represents choice, perhaps in a world where there's very little of that. And we get images of white sand and the cerulean wash of the sea, all representing freedom. Gorgeous atmospheric colouring by Mark Kelly, punctuated, of course, brilliantly by Ian Mosley on drums. I love the last line of this song. This is more than a treasure, this was sent to me by God. The idea of valuing something for its intrinsic worth rather than its sheer monetary value is quite profound, especially in this context. The song Care explores notions of mortality, juxtaposed with this motif of time running out. No one knows how much time we actually have. The philosopher Heidegger spoke of this notion of thrownness, The idea that we're just thrown into the world with our privileges and deficits, and in the words of another great philosopher, my mother, we've just got to make the best of a bad lot. But there's certainly no doubt that some of us have a hard old road to trudge, where the reaching out for angels is quite understandable. The whole track starts with this funky, swampy bass sound, with Peter Travis channeling his inner Sly in the Family Stone, before it explodes in this cinematic guitar lead from Steve Rothery and an atmospheric synth sound. This song was inspired by a friend of Hogarth's who was critically ill, and Hogarth's voice on this is remarkable, I must admit. His voice is incredibly emotive. I love it. About 4 minutes 55 into this song, it all quietens down and we get this atmospheric sea of sounds with it's like a chiming clock, I think, created by the guitar. There is no doubt that on this album there were breathtaking moments of sonic contrast. However, the final section, Angels on Earth, was actually inspired by a mural in Manchester painted by Paul Barber, itself based on a photograph taken during the early stages of the pandemic. The photograph was taken by Joanne Churchill, who was a nurse. I hope I've got all that right. The original photo featured one of Churchill's colleagues dressed in sea blue hospital scrubs, her face expressing uncertainty, anger and exhaustion. It's certainly hard to absorb the enormity of this number. It's absolutely majestic. Listening to this is almost a transcendent experience. I love the lines at the end of this one. The angels of this world are not in the walls of churches, as well as the heroes of this world are not in the Hall of Fame. Amen to that. The song ends with this beautiful line, an angel here on earth came to carry me home, leaving us as listeners feeling redeemed, replenished, even hopeful. If fear used very effectively, by the way, the analogy of the storm, this album helps us to batten down the hatches and perhaps take solace in the fact that tomorrow there may be some blue skies. I'd like to end with a quote from Prog magazine, who said of this album, "There's plenty of powerful sounds here to keep us listening to it for however much time we've got left." Anyway, you've been watching an episode of New Album Review. Please be sure to check some of the cards that are now appearing on this screen. Other than that, I hope you stay well, stay healthy, but more importantly that you keep listening.